Arvid, so we are clear across the world from each other, but in today's Zoom world, who cares?
Yeah, that's
and
right.
Brings people like you onto the show. I'm super excited. And small little story before we kick into the show. I was talking with my brother about my English teacher. So she just hit her 100th birthday, and the reason I bring this up is because of the business that you and your wife worked on. And so the reason Miss Brenning, is in my mind and my brother's mind and literally decades of people is because of how many notes she would write. I mean, like, it was truly like you were her only student. And we only literally over Thanksgiving, we were talking about, it must have taken her like an insane amount of time for the feedback for every single paper she wrote. And she did it for like 60 some years. And anyway, so I found that really interesting as I was looking at your book.
It's incredible how dedicated teachers are. That's one of the things that we found, like, from the beginning when we started figuring out who we want to go serving, right? And we later built FeedbackPanda to serve online English teachers, how much dedication they have for their craft, right? They love teaching, like literally. They don't just enjoy their job. They could not do that job.
Mm-hmm.
Like in many cases, we were looking at people as our customers who were doing this, like online English teaching for Chinese companies, teaching through the internet, English as a second language to Chinese children somewhere in China. Right? It was like this super niche business. But in many cases, these people were doing this as their second or third job. Like, that kind of tells you a lot about either the fiscal situation of these people and their passion and the kind of excitement that they got from waking up at, must have been 2 or 3 in the morning US, because you teach in the late evening hours in China, which is really early, like long before sunrise in the States, no matter where you are. And those people still got up before their own kids woke up, taught for 2 to 3 hours, then made breakfast for their kids, and then went to their day job, which often was also teaching.
Right.
And then they came back and tried to maybe fit in another hour of teaching, and then did their reporting. All this kind of really intense workload for people who were mostly struggling financially. So we had an extremely good time helping those people who were severely underserved. Like, you probably know, like, teachers paying for their own materials out of their own pockets and getting any funding from their schools, or even the parents won't pay for anything for their kids because they expect the teacher to pay for it. So you have these people who are starved financially, and we could serve them with a cheap product, but really, really get them to save 2 hours of extra work time a day that they wouldn't have to do, which meant either making more money teaching, because like this online English teaching was essentially a gig economy stuff. You would teach for half an hour, and then you would teach another child for another half hour. Often those teachers, and Danielle included, she was teaching often for 10, 12 hours a day. And that's like full on teaching. It's not just sitting there reading something. It's like dancing and singing, like really intense Skype style focused one-on-one teaching. That drains you. And if you need to do 2 hours of unpaid work to even be paid for your teaching, that's what student feedback was in this case, it's going to drain you even more. And so our product was really helping people through some sort of automation. We had like a templating system, and teachers could share their own templates with each other.
Because you wrote a book called Zero to Sold, which we're going to talk about, and you had 4 phases or stages of the Bootstrapped Business, and then you talk a lot about your exit process, which we can dive into. So I want to kind of cover the four stages and then your exit story. But before we do that, Arvid, I'd love to hear, this topic that we were just talking about. You're explaining the problem, which I think is so important, of understanding the customer's demand and why they had a problem, because, to niche in sometimes can help with exponential growth. I know you talk about that a little bit, but so just give us a little bit of a background on the business, how you guys created it, and then we can dive into the journey.
So Danielle was teaching from home, like essentially sitting in front of her computer and teaching kids in China, because she had a leg injury. Essentially, she's a trained opera singer. Like, Danielle is a professional musician. But if you have a leg injury, if you can't leave the house, kind of hard to, can't get people into your apartment, just hundreds of them. It just doesn't work. She needed a job she could do from home online. So she found this online teaching platform in China. There's lots of them now. It used to be a couple of them back then. That was 2017. And she just started making a lot of time for that job because she could essentially spend as much time as she wanted teaching as many kids as she would. And she would get, I don't know, like 20, 30 bucks an hour. That's like the amount of money that you make. It's not stellar kind of money, but if you spend a lot of time, you can make some good amount of cash. But again, it's very draining, and she felt that she felt really drained. And that was a pretty clear sign that there was something to build, because she started building her own little system using Excel and Word. And I feel whenever people start using any kind of spreadsheet to do something, there's like a SaaS business in there somewhere, right? It just kind of yells at, okay, this can be automated apparently, because people use automation software for this. And she had her own system, lots of Word documents, lots of Excel sheets just flying around, and she would copy certain parts of what she wanted to say about the lesson. Because essentially these online English schools they had a curriculum that was pretty static. Like as a teacher, you would often teach the same lesson just to multiple students, and it would be the exact same lesson, like a PowerPoint slide kind of thing, right? You would go through the slides and you teach the words and you would sing a little bit. The song was kind of, they would tell you which song to use even, and it's very structured. And if you need to give a student feedback after each of these 25-minute lessons, God. If it's the same kind of structure at all times, you will probably use the same text at all times. And that's what Danielle started doing. She wrote little templates in her Word documents, and you would just copy the text and put the name of the student in, and then paste it and use another piece of text and write something. That was what she would do. And if you're like a software engineer or somebody who comes from a world where if you have to repeat a thing once after you've done it originally, you start automating, then this kind of looks like a veritable system that you could actually turn into logic, into software. So we looked into this, and she showed me the system, and we envisioned like what it could be, and she designed it, she conceptualized it, because she knew exactly what her problems were, and she didn't have to guess what teachers felt, what kind of pains they ran into. She ran into these pains every single day. So the system that she envisioned, I just built it because I'm a software engineer, and I
was going to say, so you got to give the listeners your background. So you got your wife who's got a broken foot, who is an opera singer now teaching English, and you're just sitting there assessing her problems and figuring out how to systematize it. So what led you to the point where you viewed this problem as an opportunity?
Well, I've been building software for the last decade, pretty much, right? I'm was born in '85, so I think I'm 35-ish around that. Like, probably.
As of right now, 2020 kind of puts a blur on everything, but yeah.
I tell you, it even makes you forget your own age at some point. But I've been working professionally as a software engineer for maybe 12 years at this point. And I started out like studying. I dropped out of university a couple of times. I just went for the actual job because I enjoy building things. And I had a quick stint in Silicon Valley. I worked for a startup, like a venture-backed startup there for a year remotely here from Germany too. And then worked for German traditional software engineering businesses and started a couple of things with a couple of friends here in Berlin and in other places. So I went through all of the different kinds of software engineering in my life. And I found the most enjoyable ones to be the ones where I was actually a co-founder of the business as well. Right? Cool. Where I was in a CTO role, where I was a lead engineer, or something where I could actually put my ideas into practice and not just somebody else's, right? Yep. And that was always enjoyable. So I had a couple of projects with my friends, like I said, in Berlin, that failed horribly or didn't really go anywhere. Business, you try and you fail, but you learn something at all times. Like, well, even if we fail, and when we did fail, we would learn why we failed, or at least why we didn't succeed. And that would give us like some kind of knowledge, some kind of interesting perspective for the next thing that I would be part of. And FeedbackPanda was one of these things where we just really saw an opportunity to first off solve our own problem. And I'm saying our own problem. I was not a teacher, but Danielle spending 12 plus 2 hours a day not being my partner, that was a problem, right? For me, as whatever I would have been, it would have been a problem.
I would like you back.
Exactly. So solving this through software solved my problem just as much as it solved hers, because it would give us the opportunity to spend more time. Other people would have used this additional time to make more money to support their family. We used it to actually be a family. It's just, an opportunity that we saw. And then the moment we built something like the first prototype and Danielle started using it, it immediately freed up the time, just like we wanted this particular time to be freed up. So we knew this solves a problem. And since we also understood that every teacher in this community, and I think when she started out, there must have been around 5,000 online English teachers in that particular school alone, right? And that's like the leading Chinese school that everybody else in China tried to copy. So you have like this whole ecosystem of copycat solutions that also tried to hire North American and English or British and South African native English speakers. So there was 5,000 people when we started. A couple months in, there was 7,000 people hired by that company. I think a year later, we must have been at 15,000. And when we then sold the company, they were at 75,000 teachers that they had hired as contractors. It was pretty clear that we were looking at an emerging market there, right? Online English teaching it was nascent when we joined, but we saw that there was a trajectory. So we knew that if we built something right now to help the people that exist in the space at this moment, and we enable them just by being a nice and friendly brand to talk about us in a positive way, we wouldn't have to do any marketing. We hoped, at least, right? It turned out to be that way, but our idea was, okay, this is something, a self-sustaining system. We just need to be in there, and then we can grow with this market.
Yep.
And we did. Like we honestly, we didn't do any paid advertising. We tried. We spent like $100 or something on Google ads and Facebook ads. Facebook was kind of okay. Google was like completely pointless. And once we saw, okay, this doesn't seem to affect our rates at all, we just really doubled down on community outreach, on being embedded in the community, just talking to people, responding to people where they are, which is mostly Facebook groups for our customers. And we provided content. We had a newsletter going and highlighted a member of our community to the rest of the community, just really trying to build more community in a system where it was very tribal. Like the online teacher community was highly tribal. And if you follow like Seth Godin's writing, he has a book out called Tribes, and he really makes it
the 1,000 followers, right?
The 1,000 true fans. And the concept of this is you want a community that is heavily interconnected. Everybody follows the same people. Everybody has the same interests. And the moment you establish yourself as a reasonable voice of expertise in that community, your marketing it's so extremely streamlined because you have this reputational baseline of being a part of a tribal community, right? You don't need to convince people that you're trustworthy. By being there and talking with people, communicating with people, you already built that trust, so that everything you bring to the community, eventually, at some point when you have established that trust, people will trust. Right? It takes a while to establish yourself in any given community, and it took us a while for people to get talking about FeedbackPanda. But once they did, and we didn't need to incentivize that. We added a referral system at some point. We wouldn't actually have needed to. People were sharing our link even without being incentivized to do so, because they just felt this is something that other teachers need, right? They were genuinely convinced that our tool was something that was a necessity to be a good teacher. Don't need ads. That's the best kind of word of mouth you can have.
Arvid, have you heard of Jobs to Be Done? Bob Mesta. He wrote a book called Demand Side Selling. Bob's been on the show. And what you're describing, and why I think this is important, is especially in today's noisy marketplace, where when you truly understand what your customers are struggling with, and you're talking to them and meeting their struggling needs to help them make progress. I mean, it sounds so simple, but like the reason I bring that up is because the SaaS business, there's so many people now trying to roll up SaaS companies and you name it, because they've got great products, but the SaaS founder doesn't necessarily know how to sell. But the problem is, I watch these companies, Arvid, they spend so much money on ads. Their client acquisition cost goes way down because in this hopefully ties to the back end of your story, where the valuations are based on a multiple revenue. So no one's really focused on profit. They're just burn through the cash, grow the MRR, and then offload this system of companies or software to someone else. And it's just, people lose sight of the customer, of making money, of helping people. Not to say that both aren't bad. There's not a right or wrong necessarily, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. But I think there's a solid lean towards, in your story is proof that what you did worked.
I think funding is a big point. I mean, if you have money to waste, you can. Right? If you have some sort of funding from a source that's just like throwing money at you, and they say, well, have you tried paid ads? Well, sure, let's try paid ads. Got money for it. But if you're a bootstrapper, and that's what we were, and that's what I see most of these little niche businesses that actually succeed at being, like they don't have money to waste. Like we tried with €100. Honestly, at that point, that might have been like 10% of our monthly recurring revenue. That was a big expense, right? Because for somebody else, this is like there's no money at all, or it barely registers anywhere. But for us, it was a big experiment. So we didn't throw a couple thousand in there, just 100 to see if it worked at all, and to save us from wasting money. And find something better. I think that's the most important point. Like you have to find something else.
I was just gonna say, do you think that like the being diligent with your money, and it just has an impact on how focused you are on solving an actual problem while making money? You know what I mean? Like it's just,
I think so.
People just lose sight of that, and I just find it so intriguing how that people, it's because you don't have to work as hard if you just got money to spend. Then you don't have to work as hard to figure out if the customers actually want it. You just like deploy millions of ads, and hopefully a small percentage of it's like direct mail. Like 1% of the people are gonna spend or come engage.
And honestly, the whole 1% of the people, I think that's symptomatic of this, because if you look at the venture capital world, where 1 out of 100 businesses is supposed to win, and the other ones will likely fail, and that's already built into the funding system. That like you throw so much money into these businesses, hoping that one of them explodes and pays for the failures of all the others. Well, then nobody will really look at your spending. Because obviously the incentive there is to spend so much to capture the full market and, like get the hockey stick growth, that you're incentivized to spend your money.
I know.
Because if you build a sustainable business, well, then you're not going to explode. You're not going to exhibit this hockey stick potential. Yep. It's hilarious to me that there are funding sources that would give you money, but be disappointed if you turn it into a sustainable business. But that is, that's what
I'm laughing because you are so spot on. Like, it's so crazy, Arvid. I like, because we play in this world of teaching entrepreneurs that are founders, not VC backed, not PE backed, how to build valuable businesses. And sometimes you can grow yourself into bankruptcy. And like, there's this whole concept, like the pre-seed, $10 million valuation, pre-revenue, it just like doesn't make any sense. I mean, like I understand where that fits into the marketplace, but it can't be the entire marketplace. Most of the marketplace needs to focus on making money.
Yeah, and I agree. It is a real thing, and it does work. It should not forget that, right? Because Uber exists and Airbnb exists, and if you just look at the S1s and them actually like IPOing and stuff, there is a path to this. But the thing is, you look at how many people actually make it along this path and how many people don't. And that's why I feel as a bootstrapper or as an indie founder or whatever you want to call it, self-funded entrepreneur, I want as many people as possible to succeed at the same time. I don't want some to succeed hilariously and all the others to fail. And that's where the system, I mean, it's a risk weight system, right?
It's broken though. Like, there's an article that I just read recently, Arvid, that is about how VCs and how much money that's chasing returns is going into the space. And there was this hilarious one about food delivery and how like literally everybody in the supply chain now is losing money. The restaurants, the food delivery apps, the drivers, everybody's losing money.
Yep.
It's like, because no one, it's like, what the heck, man? No one said, hey, can everybody make money along the way? Because there's an actual problem here. And what are the economics to solve that problem?
Yeah, I don't understand it either. It feels, it must be like I can only reason here that the idea is to minimize risk for a special select group of people that are involved, investors,
obviously, chasing the returns, right?
But at doing so much damage along the way, particularly to the most vulnerable of people. And I feel that is why I don't want to necessarily be part of. I mean, I also invest, but I invest in bootstrap companies. I'm invested in Earnest Capital, for example, right? That is where I know, or that's what I know. I know how bootstrap businesses work. I know how SaaS businesses work. So I know that there is a path that all these companies that are in earnest, that like 10, 20, whatever amount of companies are in there per batch even, they all have a chance. So they all will produce revenue, and that will flow back to me in some way. So by helping all of them with money, by helping all of them with advice, I can actually help every single person that is somewhere in there, not just a couple, or help one and the others fall off to the side. I want all of them to succeed, right? Because I was fortunate enough to actually be able to build a successful and sustainable business with Danielle. Like, we built something really neat. It grew and grew and grew, and then we got to sell it. This is not what happens to most people. And I want more people to have that, because it opened up financial stability for us. It opened up completely new opportunities. I mean, the fact that I'm talking to you is a result of this, you know? And this is important to understand. Like, it's a step among many, but it's a step that few people can reach, because the systems that are in place are so heavily disincentivizing from taking this path. Like, either you get a job or you get VC money, but then there's always the risk, and then they stamp you as a failed founder. I mean, here in Germany, if you fail, it's the end of the world. In the States, or that's what I understand, it's less of a problem. Failure is fine as long as you can kind of rationalize it, and it's like a mark of honor on the way to your eventual success. But if you're a German entrepreneur and you fail horribly, nobody wants to talk to you anymore. At least that's how it used to be. It's changing. The world is interconnected and globalized, I guess. But if your whole life, and I was raised in Germany, I was educated in Germany, avoiding making mistakes was paramount in our education system. And it likely is in almost all education systems anywhere, at least where grades are involved. And I don't want to go into this detour, you know?
Speaking from the teaching family, right? And I've got some...
Right. Because in some way, it's a societal problem. It's a problem on a much higher level. But if you've been raised like that, then starting a business is extra hard, and there are lots of barriers in the way of getting there. Funding is hard to get, and people will not help you because they fear the taint of failure to be on them as well. It's the whole thing. So
that is super awesome context, Arvid, to understand your intentions when you started the business. So like, if you've got a cultural voice talking about how failure is not a good thing. So I want to hear your mindset when you guys started the business. What was your intent? And the reason I say that is because, intentional growth being the title of the podcast, like growing with the end in mind. A lot of people don't start with that, or they start with some, very hazy vision of, oh, someday I'll sell this, or I'm going to have a great job. I'm curious on, like, when you started it, other than creation in the software, creative, artistic world, from the business perspective, what was your thoughts for the business? And then what was how did you march towards it?
Okay, this needs a bit more backstory, but it's a good one. I promise. Just at that time in mid 2017, I was still employed as a salaried software engineer by a company here in Germany. They were in Hamburg, which is in the north, and I was living in Berlin, which is like 3 hours by car or by train. So I was commuting to that place 3 days a week, and I was working remotely from Berlin for 2 days a week. And if you have a 3-hour train ride or 2.5-hour train ride for 3 days a week, that's like 5 hours a day of commuting, 15 hours a week that you have nothing to do. And I was sitting on a train we're in Germany, internet is, or connectivity, mobile connectivity is really bad if you're not in a big city. So you're essentially sitting in a metal tube with nothing to do. So what I did for most of that time, for those 2.5 hours there and back, was listening to podcasts just like this one, and the Indie Hackers podcast, and all kinds of podcasts related to entrepreneurship and software engineering, because that's what I was interested in. And I was reading a lot of books. I was reading The E-Myth by Michael E. Gerber. I was reading Built to Sell by John Warlow. I was reading Hooked by Nir Eyal. And I was reading The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. All these books that are really seminal. They're really, really good. And they show you from one particular perspective, each of them, how to build a business that doesn't have to be a gigantic business with hundreds of employees, but can actually be your thing that you own and that generates value and wealth for you. So I spent like 2 years working for that company in Hamburg. That means I spent a good 100 weeks with 15 hours each just commuting. That was a lot of time for a lot of podcasts and for a lot of books. So while I was working in that salary job, I was just really ingesting all this information. Honestly, if you ask me why I did this, I have no idea. It was just something that was super interesting to me then. I think it all started with Tim Ferriss. I found his podcast, and that was before he was so deep into the more philosophical parts. He had more like entrepreneurial guests on.
He was doing the hacking of the 4-hour week and getting yourself out of your business before he was like diving into like the brain science and
the mushrooms and stuff, which is still great. I still enjoy that, but not the same way I found the initial content. And that's great. You see growth in him too, right? You see where he came from and what he is really interested in. Yep. And particularly seeing this was interesting for me as well, because he said, okay, here's this guy who seemingly made it and he's still chasing something else, right? It's still something out there for him to find. And it was really cool. But all the other content that I found, the guests that he had on the show, they had their own shows or their own books. And I just dove into all of these things. So I had this foundation of knowledge that was just like sitting there ready to be used. And then at some point, Danielle had her injury and had her, I guess, pivot into teaching English online. And I had all of this stuff waiting. And then the moment we figured out, okay, this is something that is not just good for her, it's also good for all these thousands of other people out there. We could just really use it. We understood what a good business is. And that's why I always come back to when I talk about intentionality. I had read Built to Sell by John Warlow. And the whole point that he makes in this book is if you build a good business, it's a sellable business, right? A sellable business is a good business. And that is, you can exchange that. If your business is good, you can sell it. And if you can sell your business, it's probably good, right? So it's just about how to structure your business. And he talks about automation and focusing on one thing and diversifying your customer base. And there's a lot of good stuff in that book. I always recommend it because it's just really helpful. It was helpful to us. And understanding that I could build a sellable business that I don't have to sell, right? That a good business that runs without me, that is completely automated and highly well documented, that other people could run for me, that is something that I could run forever, or I can sell it. It's completely optional. That was the goal. That was always the goal behind FeedbackPanda. And then I guess we never really thought what exactly we were going to be doing, if we were going to sell it, or if we're going to be growing it. We just wanted to run it because we wanted to have the entrepreneurial experience. The only goal that I had, which is hilarious because it's pretty basic of a goal, I wanted to reach 50K MRR. That was my goal for the whole business. If you look at a SaaS business, that is like a pretty low bar. If you have a sustainable business, you can grow it to that. And had no goals after that. Once we reached that, I was like, what now? I didn't have any further goals. So I'm probably going to work on that for the next business. But other than
$500,000 a monthly recurring revenue, right?
Probably, because that is a much more interesting goal in terms of the eventual valuation of the business. But still, the goal was build a really cool business, learn how to do it, and then do it, and then have it, and see what comes of that.
And I want to pull that thread, Arvid, to say, like, how did your decisions? I mean, you only owned the business for 2 years, right? Mm-hmm. And then you sold it. So I want to kind of take those, some of these milestones in chunks, but how did your decision from the beginning of Built to Sell, right? Like, or having the options, my partner and I just did a podcast about annual income versus long-term value creation and how, if you're thinking about the value of the business, your decisions are going to be different along the way, potentially.
Right.
So that's curious on how, point. Yeah. So like operationally, maybe some stories about how your decision of Built to Sell or having the options impacted certain decisions. And then where along the way did you understand valuations? I'm curious on how that journey went. Smiling.
if I understand them at all at this point, because But okay, let me get to that. So operationally, we focused on keeping as much money in the business as possible, just really make it recession-proof and make it stable and retain the value that it had. We didn't really have much to actually invest it in because we didn't have these marketing sinkholes where we could have thrown the money in. We had word of mouth, pretty stable word of mouth marketing. It was slow, but it was there, right? And if you have something that is really like sustainable, or
Low
it is
and free.
sustained. It's free. It happens. The only thing we need to do is like write in our newsletter about how great our customers are. Like, yeah, all right, we're going to keep doing that, right? So our operational expenses were fairly low. The business itself, like technically, was fairly cheap. Like we ran it on a pretty small Google cloud system, and we barely had any expenses when it came to external services. The only thing that we really paid lots of money for was a database, because we had a hosted database, database as a service. We used that because we didn't want to hire a database administrator or anything like this. And I think that is the point that I want to make here. We didn't hire at all. We started with 2 people, and 2 years in, we were still 2 people. And we automated everything we could, particularly when it came to customer service. So we used Intercom in the little, the chat widget in the corner, and we used that system heavily for all of our communication. Our newsletter went through there. Our customer service chats went through there. We had used their knowledge base extensively. So whenever some customer would have a problem, we would solve it for the customer. And if we never had written a step-by-step tutorial on how to solve this problem, we would write it at that point, put it in the knowledge base. And if somebody would come with the same question again, Intercom is so good at recognizing this that they would automatically suggest the article from the knowledge base. And that's one less customer communication that you have to do, because they could solve their own problem. So
it was almost like the same exact philosophy that you had in the product for customer service, right? Because like the teachers were using automation to respond to their students, and you were using automation to respond to the teachers about how to use the system.
It's a very recursive application of a lot of automation in the system, and it worked well for them in the product, and it worked well for us outside of or through the product. We just set up good standard operating procedures and how to resolve people's problems, knowing that eventually we would need to hand those over either to our own employees or to somebody else who wants to hire. Doesn't matter. We kept them going. It kind of helps that I'm German, because I love documentation for some reason. It seems to be genetic with us. And when we sold the business, I did like an 11-hour video walkthrough through the code base for the developer that was going to replace me. I think he might have watched it. I hope he did. But it was just really enjoyable for me to walk through my own work and comment on it for somebody else to pick up where I left off. Yeah, we automated as much as we could. We documented as much as we could. We built systems that were completely autonomous and self-sustaining. The software itself was self-healing. If like there was any server issue, it would do its thing.
Scripts behind. I love that.
It would all try. I tried to remove myself from the business as much as possible. In terms of money, we tried. Like I said, we kept it in the company. We really didn't take any money out of the business. We kept it in there, which didn't really make any difference when we sold it, because we still like paid salaries and stuff, but it really kept us able to respond to certain things. And had COVID hit a year earlier or 2 years earlier, we'd have a good solid amount of couple months more runway than other companies would have. That was the idea, is to have it at least recession proof. Or recession-ish.
Recession-proof-ish, right?
Proof-ish. Yeah, exactly.
All the English teachers, if they're listening in, would be freaking out with our words. So Arvid, I'm curious along that, as you're doing this, you talked about in your book, like because you had this mindset of built to sell and having choices is, what do you do with the business? Where did you start to learn about valuations? When and how would the time be right? And what was your journey in your mindset of what and how? Because I want to start walking through that journey of actually selling the business.
That's very interesting. I knew that the thing was going to be sellable, because we set it up to be sellable, or at least a well-documented and highly automated business. But we never wanted to sell. And we never actively looked for anybody to sell the company to. We just kind of got there. I don't know. So we had our business listed on indiehackers.com. We had a little product page there, and we had our Stripe verified revenue listed on that website too. Right. So every day people could check like what's the current MRR for FeedbackPanda, and it would automatically be in a graph. And the graph went like from the bottom left to the top right. So it was an interesting graph. And it wasn't just interesting for people who wanted to see how other businesses are doing. It was actually interesting for potential acquirers as well. And the people who eventually did acquire us, Short Capital, as a private equity company, they found us there. they looked through the database of SaaS businesses. They found one that had the right form of graph, and they started reaching out to us. Like Kevin McCardle.
Wait a second. You're saying that a private equity firm wanted to buy a company that had a 45-degree straight line.
Yeah, exactly.
Weird, right?
And that is so nice to know, because when Kevin reached out, he sent essentially a cold email to Danielle, because she's the CEO, or was the CEO of the business, because her idea, her thing, she gets to lead the business, obviously. She then started talking with him. She figured out, okay, nice that you are interested in potentially acquiring the software. And he phrased it in a way, he said, we saw your business, we really like it. Are you interested in selling? If not, perfectly fine. Let's just talk. Like this, it's just me reaching out, asking if you're fine. And we said, yeah, sure, let's have a chat. And then we had a chat, and there was a couple of other people who were interested in it too at that point, because we just really gotten to 50K MRR. And I think that's when you start to show up on a couple radars. And we had a couple conversations, and became clear to me, at least, that I was ready to sell at that point. I had never really considered it because we didn't have anybody reaching out, but we had then. And I felt I was kind of getting into a burnout zone, because I was, as much as we had automated, we had 5,000 customers. Something would come in at some point, right? People would ask, people would have a problem. And if something broke, we had a couple of integrations into these online schools. And if they changed their, website, we had to fix our integration, and they wouldn't tell anybody that they were going to change their website. They were just going to change it. So I would have to immediately, build a solution. And that could happen at 3 a.m. or at 8 at night. It could happen at any point. And it was stressful, because my phone was always one message away from pulling me out of whatever I was doing and getting me back into the business. So I was spreading myself thin. I didn't hire anybody. Big mistake on my part to take care of these things for me, because I should have hired some person to just look into server maintenance and keeping stuff rolling, but I didn't. It was all on me as well. And so I felt ready to give this to somebody else. And we also figured out this is our only asset, really, right? We both were working on this. It was worth a lot, but if we stopped working on this tomorrow, it wouldn't be worth a lot after that, right? We needed to diversify and in terms of our own wealth at this point. So we were ready to look into it. And then we started reading the proper literature, looking into how other companies who sold their businesses, how they approached it, what valuation is, what the multiples are, what is EBITDA, what's that? Because you don't run into it. We didn't even have a P&L sheet, because who would we need it for? We didn't have to report to anybody. We ran the business, right? So we had to do a P&L. We had to really make sure that everything is fine with our taxes and all the documents are in place, just even for this initial conversation, let alone the due diligence at some later point. I listened to every single episode of John Warrillow's Built to Sell radio podcast, which at that point was 200 episodes in. That was
hearing my dad. my dad was on Warrillow's podcast, and then John's been on our podcast a couple times. Yeah, it's go keep going.
Yeah, we got to be on his show as well, which was really nice, because all the guests that he had really helped us figuring out what are red flags, what is earn out, how do you structure a deal, what is a strategic acquisition, all of these things. I had no idea, but just listening to a couple weeks worth of podcast, just eye-opening. And I think he actually has a book out in a couple weeks in January 2021 called The Art of Selling a Business. So he's working on that particular part right now. The book is about everything that he learned from that and in his consulting business. So
how did you take some of that knowledge that you'd learned from podcasts and from these books and start to apply? Did you reach out to brokers? Did you start to how did you start to take that knowledge and turn it into action? And how long was that timeline?
Yeah. Oh, that was actually quite quick. We reached out to brokers, had a conversation with them just for getting a feeling for the initial valuation that they would give our business, but we decided not to necessarily put our business on the market through them, because we essentially already were in talks with people, and it felt like this could go somewhere. Let's see. Let's not overcommit to this whole process with multiple people, right? Because we were just 2 people, and we were running a business at its most at the time, right? We were already at full capacity from just running the business. I mean, I was on a verge of burnout, adding one more thing, probably not a good idea, but it was at least something enjoyable and new, and something with the potential of really changing our lives. So yeah, brokers were a big thing. Just really making sure that the documents that we were signing were fine. Like any LOI, any kind of agreement, even an NDA, these kind of things, they have to be in our favor or we don't sign them, right? And just applying that knowledge from the show and from the books that I read, that really helped us. And Danielle did her research too, and she was really good at negotiating, something I can't do for some reason. I'm not a good negotiator, but she is.
Leave it to the English teacher, right?
It's awesome because like she got us the final price that we wanted and all these kind of things. So she did an amazing job like navigating the business and the relationship with our acquirer throughout this whole phase. But it really didn't take too long. I don't know.
Why, Arvid, did you hire so you had the PE firm that had reached out, you had some people reaching out from Indie Hacker, and obviously creating some attention because of the 50K MRR. Did you hire a broker, and did you end up selling to the person that reached out to you, and why did you make that decision? Right? Because and the reason I'm asking this question is the amount of out of the blue offers that are happening right now, because money is chasing returns, that people see like the dollar sign that someone might offer, but not realize that that's not how much goes into your bank account on closing. And so there's all this thought process, like, do you take the out of the blue offer? Do you hire a broker, investment banker? Why do you do that? I know you're not going to be talking about the specific numbers, but maybe talk about the deal structures that you learned about.
So we didn't have to sell. That maybe is the most important part, right? We were not desperate or anything like this. So we selling was an option. And we had a sellable business, but like I said, initially, a sellable business is a well-running business, so we might just continue running it. So we had our own demands, and they were pretty strict. Like, we wanted to get rid of the whole thing. Like, we didn't want to be involved in it necessarily. Like, if it was something that we could choose to stick around in another capacity, fine. But we didn't want this to be part of our sale. So no earnout. That was essentially the thing. And we wanted our business to be in the hands of people who would actually continue running it, because our initial mission was to help teachers. When it wasn't to build a gigantic business and make lots of money, it was to help these teachers. And we wanted those teachers to continue to be helped. So we would only sell to somebody who wouldn't fold it into something else, or wouldn't the acqui-hire, or all these potential options out there. No deal for us. We wanted to sell it, and somebody would keep it running. They would hire people to run it, to staff it, and then run it, and keep those people, those online English teachers, keep them in their jobs and keep them sane. That was the whole idea. So that kind of restricted the amount of candidates that we would seriously consider. And we talked to everybody, we made our demands, and the people that couldn't or wouldn't go with them, well, they said, oh yeah, it's just not a fit. But we didn't have a broker for that. We just did these things too. Being in Berlin.
How did you find those people? Because I think you're pulling on a thread of a theme that we love, which is having options, because then you can increase the chances that you get what you want, whatever the hell it is. So by understanding your demands is one part of being intentional, but the next one is getting enough options present. So if you didn't hire a broker, how did you get a bunch of options? And then how did you do this when you were already on the verge of burnout?
For some reason, they were just there. Honestly, we didn't look for them. They came to us. And I guess, we've been fairly vocal about our business, the success of our business in the founder communities. So everybody who has a foot in those communities as a private equity company, and SureSwift is one of these, because there are lots of the people who sold to them are now very active still in the indie hacker, indie founder community. And they have a large network of alumni, because SureSwift, I think, has like 39 SaaS and content businesses under their belt and in their portfolio at this point. So they have a lot of founders. And one of the guys who sold to SureSwift, Tyler Tringus, is the person who founded Earnest Capital. And they are like in the community. So it's a village.
Kevin McCardle lives in Minnesota, and he's a friend of mine.
Exactly. Kevin is also invested in Earnest. So everybody is kind of in the same group there. So there's a lot of communication and a lot of exchange. So if something is on a radar here, it's also on the radar over there. So you get a couple people. But honestly, we didn't do much to get those people to talk to us. They just talked to us, and we took our time to be very diligent. And I think that's an important thing to mention here, like doing our own due diligence on those people, like not just talking to them and having them tell us that they're going to give us millions of dollars or something like that, but actually reaching out to other people who sold to them, other people who may have not sold to them, like doing our buyer or seller side due diligence, and really researching who these people are, where the money is coming from, like where those funds are located, what they're structured, like really doing some deep dive into the backgrounds of who is potentially going to be acquiring the business. And we just did that on the side while we were still running our business, but we weren't pushed around, which was great. Like knowing that there was no, if you don't talk to us within the next 24 hours, we're never going to talk to you again. Like these kind of tactics did not happen. Mm-hmm. And I guess this sounds like an advertisement for SureSwift Capital at this point, but it should be, because they were great. And everything went super smoothly. The whole process, like everything from this initial chat to the first exchange, like actually like LOI and
that's
the first offer.
And I have to be honest, Arvid, this is just super hilarious for me because I didn't know that you sold their SureSwift Capital. And so like, the fact that I had lunch with Kevin, one of the founders, like a month ago, because he lives in Minnesota, is just hilarious. And you're living in Germany. I mean, and truly, because they have a conscious capitalist, long hold type approach. So I think it's just interesting that through your whole organic process, you ended up selling to a guy that's here in the
Twin Cities. Friend of yours. Yeah, it feels hilarious. We met Kevin in where was it, in Dubrovnik, at MicroConf Europe at the conference. Like they were like sponsoring the conference there, and that was just a couple months after we had sold to him. So it was really nice, a really nice meeting that guy that we've been chatting through Zoom. Or did we already have Zoom at that point? I don't even know. Technology is like. You never know. But we were just chatting with him, and we had a great time, like spending some time going to have dinners with the SureSwift crew, and just getting to know all these people who took over our business. It was really enjoyable, and it, again, opened a lot of doors being in this community, because all of a sudden you have this kind of network of founders who are doing their own thing, like Tyler or Moritz Dausinger, also fellow German, sold to SureSwift a couple times, and so building his next SaaS business. All of a sudden, those doors open. It's really, really cool to just be connected with people. Yeah. And that was definitely worth it, particularly because, like I said, burnout was a phase that I was in. It was great to not have to deal with these things after selling, because the transition period where we handed over the business, I think that was over within a week or two. It really didn't take too long, because again, completely sellable business, everything automated, everything documented. Well, what do you need to do? There's no secrets anymore, right? We have put that all into our documentation and SOPs and our manual and whatever. So that was super smooth. And then I just started writing.
Did you have other people besides SureSwift that were sitting at the table? And I'm curious, like, if you did, you said one of your non-negotiables was no earnout, right? And not being there. So like, did you at any point have the ability to weigh options of valuation and terms and condition? Because like the big thing, Arvid, is that when we talk about, you might have two valuations, how they come to that valuation might be different. How you get the money might have different strings attached. So there's I did a podcast years ago. One said, you tell me the price, I'll tell you the terms and conditions. Right. So there's, so like, well, do you have like comparison, or how did you get to the point where you were able to quantify what was in front of you?
Honestly, we didn't have too much of a comparison at that point, because all the ones, the other ones that we were talking about or talking to, they just kind of dismissed themselves at some point because of our like stringent conditions that we had. So it really didn't go too far, or at least not to a point where we could do this particular comparison. So it was all about finding something that worked for us and for SureSwift at that point. Yeah. But they were, from the beginning, they were a no earnout cash deal kind of situation, and that's what you find on their website. So
it passed the test right off the bat, right?
I'm allowed to talk about this particular stuff because they publicly talk about it on their website and in the community. There's certain things that are different for every single deal, which is the reason why we never really talk about specific numbers or specific months or percentages or whatever, because our business that the two of us built, if somebody else, two other people in the room next door had built that, would look completely different, right? So even though you may look at a similar like ARR or MRR or whatever, the expenses that we have here as a German company, if you move to France or if you move to like Honduras or something, completely different game. So the numbers, if you talk about this only in multiples and fairly large intervals of multiples, if at all, but they were from the beginning quite compatible with our business, because the other businesses that they had invested in or they had purchased or acquired were pretty much like our business. Subscription-based, highly automated, B2B-ish businesses. I mean, we were not a B2B business. We were also not a B2C business. We were in between because we were selling to freelancers, like individual agents. So we called ourselves like a B2BC. It's like business customers, like prosumers, I think is the fancy term for that. Like people who have a budget but are not part of a larger entity, so essentially self-employed. And that was always an interesting group of people to sell to, because they actually have a budget, but they don't have this gigantic process of sales. If you sell to them, you can do it on a low touch system, like a SaaS that just has a landing page. They click on sign up, right? You don't have to talk to sales and then talk to a VP of sales and then have to talk to, I don't know, like the founder's grandma or somewhere. You don't have to go through the whole show.
Rigmarole of the whole sales
directly sell, and that's what ShowSwift is also looking for. These kind of easily low touch maintainable businesses, because that just fits their portfolio. We were one of the. They knew that, we knew that, made the whole discussion much easier.
So where in the process, like when you're when you finally decided that you guys wanted to sell and the dollar amount was right, the terms, conditions, all that stuff, why did you sell? What did you want to do after? You have a whole section here, because this podcast, I don't know if I told you, Arvid, it used to be called Life After Business before I renamed it.
Okay.
So it started out because I didn't know what to do after we sold. Right. It was just truly like this, more like mental identity crisis. I read Bo Berlingham's book. So like this whole kind of concept, and then because I know we're running short on time, is like, so why did you decide to sell? What was your plan afterwards? And why did you decide not to keep it and hire someone with all the profit that you were making?
Oh, that's an interesting one, but because I was stupid. I guess that would be the answer to the last one. But like some of these options are perfectly clear in hindsight, but they are not in the present moment. So I was at a state mentally where I was very anxious, very stressed, and the fact it's pretty weird, because I could have just hired somebody to essentially do my job and pay them and still generate revenue through the business and have dividends or whatever. But I felt at that point, like even the fact that I would need to train somebody to do this would be too much.
You just spent 11 hours recording a video. I mean,
I am not saying that there aren't discrepancies in the story, right? But this is the problem. This is exactly the problem. Is that you have cognitive bias and you have cognitive what's the word for it?
Dissonance.
Yes, the cognitive dissonance between what you know is happening and what you know can happen. Like it just that moment you just feel I went out of there. And as much as I also wanted to like sell the business and get to financial stability, one of the driving factors at that point, which is totally my fault, like I didn't figure this out earlier and dealt with it, was this kind of being overwhelmed by where I was and what I was doing. So may not be the perfect choice to sell, but it was definitely a great choice. It elevated our standard of living, right? Financial independence is a good thing to reach, and definitely makes anything beyond it much more interesting, or at least makes more freedom, optionality, right? And because honestly, what you just described, you sell and then you don't know what to do, the void, that happened to me too. I had no goals. I was just like, I'm going to sell this and then be rich forever. Or I don't know. I just really didn't have that anything.
I'm going to want to do something afterwards, anyways, right?
I knew that I was going to do something. Like I have enough trust in my own capabilities that if I wanted to do something in the future, I would probably get to do something in the future. Yep. But what it was and what exactly I was going to do this year or next year or whatever, I didn't have an idea. I just wanted to be done with this and then kind of reflect on it, because one of the things that I wanted to do while running and growing FeedbackPanda was to write about it. I had this one article that I kind of wrote whenever I had a minute or two between whatever fire I was kind of dealing with at the moment. And I wrote an article on how I dealt with my anxiety running the business while I was anxiously running the business. Like that was what I had time for. So that kind of it made it apparent to me that I kind of liked writing, because it gave my mind this ability to channel and reflect and turn something that was
right?
nebulous and vague into something meaningful and concrete. And that was the first thing that I did after we sold the business. I started writing for a blog. I the Bootstrapped Founder is what I founded at that point, just because I needed an outlet for my thoughts and to take what I had learned and actually manifest it into something that other people could use. So not unlike you, just starting something to share and communicate with people. I started something to share and communicate with people, but it wasn't planned. Like I really didn't have this whole thing set up. The moment we sold, I knew, okay, I need to do something soon. So let's figure out a couple ideas, open a Notion document, put a couple of things in there, maybe a couple of domain names that would be interesting, and just collected information. But yeah, that was it. There wasn't really too much contemplation towards what was going to happen afterwards. The fact that we sold, or that we would sell, kind of appeased me in a way, knowing that there would be time for dealing with all of this stuff later. Now I figure out on getting this deal done and getting the transition through, like completed without running into issues. And we did that, and then that was over. And then we just sighed a heavy sigh of relief and figured out what to do next. Pretty much.
You know what I called it, Arvid, is phantom anxiety. I went from like hundreds of emails to, wait a second, you just kind of have this, like, you're kind of jumpy like a beaten dog.
Oh, man. I have PTSD for intercom message sounds. Do you know that? Like when the thing pops up and this little bing sound, whenever I hear that now, I need to go into my email, is the server down? And then I notice I'm not running the business anymore. Honestly.
Well, it's interesting. And you hit on this topic that we literally just covered in a podcast. It's not even released as we're recording this yet, but there's two concepts that we teach in our material. And I'll have to give you access to our course, but is separating your ownership role, the equity, as a financial asset compared to your management role, which is what you get paid for a job. And if you realize that those two are different and you can transition those differently, you could then you have to shift your mindset to focusing on long-term value creation, the value of this financial asset, which allows you to then reinvest in this whole concept of hiring to replace yourself without having to sell. You have to invest. And what happens is either people can't afford because they're living to the edge of their distributions or pay, or they don't think about this. I had this guy, Arvid, he said, I just need out because of all his, it wasn't intercom messages. It was, he's a manufacturer and it was insurance. He goes, I never want to do another insurance renewal ever again. And they make millions of dollars EBITDA. Yeah. And I said, how about you pay me $500,000? I'll do all your insurance for you.
Yeah.
And it's just this concept of, do you know that you can replace yourself? Yeah. But there's this, I don't know what it is about that experience where you kind of know you can, but you still have this anxiety there unless you take the time. I don't, there's this certain people do enough of a longer process of going through that where it's not, they're not replacing themselves out of burnt out, being burnt out. It's an intentional process. But that whole concept that you said that this might be the exact problem, I see that people don't realize that's a thing until afterwards, and they compare it to seeing the zeros and ones in the matrix.
Well, look at family businesses. In some way, that long period of the parental generation owner giving it over to their kids, they're not only do they have a long time to prepare them for, but they also can actually expose them to what they're going to be doing. Right? It's like, that if I don't know, your dad or your mom has a business and you're going to be the next in line, they will show you, they will involve you, they will show you every single part of the business, and you'll rise through the ranks and you'll be just under them. And then they'll give you more responsibility and they'll talk to you about their fears and their problems. And all of that does not exist if you found a software business from nowhere. And then you are at that point and you haven't groomed somebody to replace you, because obviously this thing just exploded out of nowhere and we don't even have kids. So like, who are we going to give it to? The neighbors? So that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So you don't have this kind of experience at seeing somebody understand the business through long exposure like you did. And I think that's what kept me at this point. It's like nobody could do this job, because to be able to do this job, you need to have all the knowledge that I have. Pointless thought, but it was in there, right? It was what my brain was telling me was nobody could replace you because nobody has your level of experience. Yeah, probably not true, but it's definitely one of those kind of founder bias situations where, well, if somebody else had this capability or experience, wouldn't they have built this business, right? Why are we the only business in this space? You kind of, it may be a delusion, maybe like a self-elevating kind of comment, but it was definitely somewhere in my mind that I couldn't find anybody to do this for me. And then people like Kevin come along and they tell you, yeah, of course, like we find these people every week. Like, okay.
And hopefully I told you that after you had the check. But I think it's an interesting concept though, Arvid, because the work that you did of recording an 11-hour video to go over your software and all the automation, and you had the mindset to begin with, a built to sell, yet you still ran into this problem. It shows to your point that it's so difficult for founders until they've sold to get this mindset. But if people can listen to this podcast and understand that this is a thing, they might not have to sell, right?
I would like that. I would like for people to understand that there are many, many options. And I think what you do in making sure that people understand that there is a distinction, that it's multiple personalities in a way, right? It's just the owner of the business, the people executing the business. And if you follow just really what Michael E. Gerber is writing, or Gerber is writing in the E-Myth, he also says there's the technician, there's the manager, and there's the visionary. Right? You need these three people to build a reliable business. Most people think being a good technician, being good at what you're doing is enough, but no, it needs to be managed and it needs to be owned. It needs to have a vision. And if you are a solopreneur, if you are a person building your own business and nobody is there helping you, you're just really everything in one, then you need to understand that you need to make time for the other two that you're likely not as much as that one, which is likely the technician. And you need to give them the space to grow and develop in your mind. And it's hard to keep multiple personalities with different diverging and often opposing interests in your mind at the same time. Honestly, but just before we recorded this, I was talking to another founder, and she was saying this too. Like she has certain things in her business that she wants to do, and then she has certain other things that she wants to do because it involves the co-founders in her business, and she wants to make them feel that they get credit for their involvement in the business. But she's the person that everybody in her community knows, so she wants to like talk about her co-founders and elevate them and show them to her community, but the community doesn't care. She's the one. She is the bright brand of the business that she's involved in. And so now she, as an owner of the business, she should just go with what works, right? What brings in the customers. But as the person managing the business, she wants to make sure that the team is happy, and that, it's just really contrasting, but it's in the same person. It's in the same mind, and you need to be able to deal with this.
Well,
and I think
interesting, Arvid, because like, I agree with you, and we should almost at some point just rally offline is
the financials. Like there's so many visionaries are like you and I, and like you have this idea of what you want and you can't figure out a way to connect the dots. So you end up just selling it or doing something drastic to change your situation. But the reality is all those different roles that you talked about, you can replace your own salary by hiring someone else. Then you have this financial asset. There's different ways. All of it comes down to money and understanding the annual income and how much the profit, net income, what is the cost structure of the payroll, all those things. And then what's the value of this asset? And then being able to weigh options like, okay, I want to take this much out, but I want to reinvest this. I want to reward people. Most people, I didn't know financials like this. And there's so many times people can't connect the dots and they just get exhausted from it.
Yeah. But yeah, because nobody teaches you. Because I think also, and that's, we had this earlier in a conversation, right? Where you are in a don't fail kind of schooling mentality. You don't diversify because you need to be good at one thing. So you kind of forget all the other things. So we go to school for, I don't know, engineering or just management or the just financial stuff. So I come out of a engineering degree that I didn't finish, but still, like everything that I learned there was about computers and building stuff. There was zero knowledge about how to build a company. There was zero knowledge about how to keep your books, even, like, just does not exist because it's not important to your specialization. And we all are specialists in some way, and then we try to build a business that suddenly needs to be a generalist.
Yeah, all of a sudden you need HR, AP, AR.
Yeah.
You're like, what?
The kind of jobs that I had in our business, like I was a customer service agent, I was a customer service technician, I did financial things, I did marketing, I did like sales, and all of these things need to happen in one person at all given times. It's not surprising that people go crazy in this world and just go super stressed, because it's hard for us to cognitively context switch between these things when all we're taught all our lives is how to do one thing good and hopefully not fail at it. Just
well, especially if you got a culture where you're not allowed to fail, at least in America,
that makes it particularly hard. Yeah, exactly.
So this has been a lot of fun. I honestly, I just enjoyed so many parts of this. Okay, let's give the audience the best place to find you, your book, and all the material that you have. And then I've got one additional question before we wrap up.
Cool. Well, thanks so much. It's been an amazing conversation. If you want to find me, you can find me on Twitter, Arvid Kahl, ARVID KAHL. I'm there way too much every single day, tweeting way too much. The book Zero to Sold you can find on any given bookstore, but zerotosoldbook.com is where I have all the additional material and stuff. I'm writing a new book called Audience First.
Oh, cool.
Which is going into detail on the initial kind of finding your audience and making sure they have a problem that you can actually solve. That would be at audiencefirst.link. And honestly, just follow me on Twitter. You'll find me there way more than I should be.
And you have, I got to say that you do have a good chunk of the book on your website too. You got a lot of great material and content that you've written out there. So props to you on that. Last question. What does the word intentional mean to you?
It means saying no, I think. That is something that I learned the hard way because I'm a people pleaser, I guess. That's what you'd call it. But saying no is fine too, and actually will lead you to more success than saying yes to everything and then kind of half-assing it.
I need to internalize that. That is very well.
Me too.
My business partner who's listening in is going to go, yeah, Ryan, did you hear what Arvid said? Arvid, this has been a blast, man. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. That was fun.